Have you ever wondered where the story of civilization truly begins? Imagine a world over 5,000 years ago where mighty rivers carved the land, and the first cities rose from the dust, where humans wrote their very first words, built towering temples, and told stories that would echo through all of history. Tonight, you're invited to drift off to sleep with the entire story of ancient Mesopotamia, a tale of mystery, power, and wonder that shaped everything we know today. So lie back, relax, and let the cradle of civilization gently carry you away. The cradle of civilization. Long ago, before the cities, the kings, and the empires, there was the land, a vast and fertile region nestled between two mighty rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. It was here, in this land that would come to be called Mesopotamia, literally between the rivers, that the first sparks of civilization flickered to life. Thousands of years ago, before the earliest known writing, before the towering ziggurats, and before any names were written in clay, small groups of humans began settling in the lush floodplains of this region. The rivers provided rich soil through annual flooding, allowing communities to cultivate crops beyond mere subsistence. Agriculture became the heartbeat of daily life. By around 10,000 BCE, humans in the area had already begun domesticating plants and animals. Wheat, barley, and lentils were harvested, while sheep, goats, and cattle grazed the fields. These early communities slowly evolved from nomadic bands into more permanent settlements. The rhythm of the rivers gave structure to their seasons. They planted in spring and harvested in autumn, relying on the life-giving water that flowed steadily from the distant mountains. This change from hunting and gathering to farming and settling was gradual but profound. It allowed for population growth, the accumulation of surplus food, and the emergence of specialization. Some people farmed while others crafted tools, wove cloth, or shaped clay. One of the earliest known settlements in southern Mesopotamia was Eridu. According to Sumerian mythology, Eridu was the first city ever created. Archaeologists have traced its origins back to around 5,400 BCE during what is now called the Ubaid period. People built mud brick houses and small temples. They created distinctive pottery with geometric designs, and they worshipped local gods tied to water, fertility, and the land. The Ubaid culture spread across southern Mesopotamia, uniting scattered villages through shared traditions, religious practices, and styles of architecture. A class of elites, perhaps early priests, began to emerge, overseeing irrigation networks and religious rites. With time, small temple communities grew into something more. Slowly, the first cities were born. Around 4000 BCE, the region entered what archaeologists call the Uruk period, named after the prominent city of Uruk. This was a time of rapid transformation. Uruk, possibly the world's first true city, swelled in size. At its height, it may have housed over 50,000 people, an immense population for the ancient world. Its skyline would have been marked by great temple complexes, including the Inanna precinct, dedicated to the goddess Inanna. The people of Uruk developed a sophisticated society. They used bronze tools and plows. They engaged in long-distance trade with lands as far as modern-day Iran, the Levant, and the Persian Gulf. Goods flowed in, precious stones, timber, and metals, and exports flowed out, textiles, grain, and crafted items. To manage this growing complexity, a need arose for record-keeping. At first, tokens and seals were used to represent quantities of goods. But around 3200 BCE, something revolutionary appeared: writing. Cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script, was etched into clay tablets using a stylus made from reed. At first, writing served practical purposes, recording grain inventories, labor contributions, and temple offerings. Over time, it evolved into a tool for literature, administration, and diplomacy. The written word had arrived and history had begun. This innovation, born from the pressures of a bustling economy and intricate bureaucracy, changed humanity forever. Through writing, stories could be passed down with precision. Laws could be codified. Rulers could proclaim their victories. The spoken word gained permanence. As the Uruk period drew to a close around 3000 BCE, cities across southern Mesopotamia, such as Ur, Lagash, and Kish, began to flourish. Each city had its own patron deity and a ziggurat, a step temple rising toward the heavens. These temples were more than places of worship. They were economic centers, storing grain, coordinating labor, and collecting taxes. Society became increasingly stratified. There were priests, rulers, merchants, craftsmen, laborers, and slaves. At the top, a king, often claiming divine sanction, governed with the aid of scribes and advisors. In many ways, these early cities functioned as independent states, often at odds with one another. The Sumerians, as the people of southern Mesopotamia are known, were not a unified people politically, but they shared a language, religious framework, and cultural identity. They told stories of gods and heroes. They revered Anu, the sky god, Enlil, the god of air and authority, and Enki, the god of wisdom and water. They believed in a cosmic order where humans served the gods by building temples and offering sacrifices. Daily life in these cities was dictated by both the divine and the practical. Farmers labored in the fields, maintaining irrigation canals and timing their work with the cycles of the sun and moon. Artisans crafted pottery, jewelry, and tools. Scribes, highly trained and respected, inscribed tablets with contracts, hymns, and myths. In this world, every object had meaning. A seal could represent ownership or status. A statue might house the essence of a deity. A ziggurat wasn't just a monument, it was a cosmic bridge linking heaven and earth. Yet this golden age was not free from conflict. As wealth and influence grew, so did rivalry. Cities warred over water rights, trade routes, and prestige. One of the earliest known kings, a man named Edina of Kish, was celebrated as the first to unify several city-states under a single rule, at least according to legend. Others would follow, each seeking to carve their name into the clay tablets of time. The Sumerians left behind more than cities and kings, they left stories. Epic tales like that of Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of Uruk who sought immortality, would echo for millennia. Through his adventures, fears, and insights, the ancient soul of Mesopotamia speaks to us still. As the 3rd millennium BCE approached, the stage was set for greater political consolidation, increased innovation, and the emergence of dynasties that would shape history for centuries. The scattered city-states of Sumer had laid the foundations. But the story of Mesopotamia was just beginning. As the 3rd millennium BCE unfolded, the patchwork of city-states across Sumer became more complex and more volatile. Wealth from agriculture, trade, and religious institutions enriched the cities, but it also bred rivalries. Political power shifted as kings rose and fell, each seeking to leave a legacy on the floodplains of Mesopotamia. Among the cities, Ur became increasingly prominent. Nestled near the Euphrates River, it grew into a major center of commerce and religious life. The ziggurat of Ur, a towering, stepped structure dedicated to the moon god Nana, stood as a symbol of the city's devotion and ambition. Its priests held sway not only over the rituals of the temple but also over large tracts of land and economic resources. In the shadow of the ziggurat, markets buzzed with activity, artisans displayed their wares, and scribes recorded transactions on clay tablets. During this time, writing matured. What began as simple pictographs evolved into a complex system of phonetic symbols. Sumerian literature flourished. Hymns, laments, legal codes, and wisdom texts were written and copied in temple schools. Among the most enduring creations was the Epic of Gilgamesh, arguably the world's first great work of literature. It told the story of a king's quest for meaning and immortality, exploring themes of friendship, mortality, and the limits of human power. Yet the city-states of Sumer were not destined to remain independent forever. The constant friction between them led to warfare and shifting alliances. As competition intensified, strong rulers began to consolidate power. Around 2334 BCE, a man named Sargon rose to prominence in the northern region of Akkad. His origins are steeped in legend. He was said to have been set adrift as a baby in a basket on the river, much like the later tale of Moses. But myth aside, Sargon was a formidable figure. He built one of the world's first empires, the Akkadian Empire. Sargon conquered Sumerian cities one by one, uniting them under his rule. His military campaigns extended beyond Sumer, reaching as far west as the Mediterranean and as far north as the Taurus Mountains. For the first time in history, a single ruler governed much of Mesopotamia. To administer his vast realm, Sargon installed loyal governors and established a centralized bureaucracy. He spread the use of Akkadian, a Semitic language, alongside the traditional Sumerian. Temples continued to function, but now they answered to imperial authority. His rule marked a turning point. No longer were cities isolated centers of power, they were now nodes in an imperial system. Trade expanded. Roads were improved. Cultural exchange accelerated. But empire brought its own tensions. Sargon's successors, notably his grandson Naram-Sin, attempted to cement their power further. Naram-Sin even declared himself a god. an audacious move that shocked traditional Sumerian sensibilities. He adopted the title King of the Four Quarters of the World and commissioned monuments celebrating his victories. But his arrogance, some believed, brought divine retribution. Indeed, the Akkadian Empire began to unravel in the face of internal revolts and external pressures. Climate change played a role too. Droughts and failing crops weakened the land. By around 2150 BCE, the Gutians, a mountain people from the northeast, invaded and brought the Akkadian period to a close. Their rule was disruptive and marked by a regression in urban life. The Sumerian city-states attempted to reassert themselves, and slowly, from the chaos, a renaissance began. One city in particular, Ur, rose once more. Under the leadership of Ur-Nammu, Ur began what historians call the Third Dynasty of Ur, or Ur3. He reigned from around 2112 BCE and brought stability and structure back to the region. Ur-Nammu issued one of the earliest known legal codes, predating Hammurabi's by centuries. Written in Sumerian and inscribed on tablets, his codes sought to administer justice, regulate trade, and organize society. The bureaucracy of Ur3 was vast and highly organized. Officials managed land, collected taxes, and enforced the king's decrees. They recorded everything: deliveries of grain, livestock counts, labor rosters. The sheer number of administrative tablets recovered from this era reveals a government obsessed with order and precision. But the glory of Ur3, like so many before it, was fleeting. It lasted just over a century. By around 2004 BCE, pressures from the Elamites in the east and the Amorites in the west brought about its collapse. The once mighty city of Ur was sacked, and its king, Ibisin, was captured. Out of the ruins, new powers emerged. In the north, the city of Ashur began to rise, a precursor to the later Assyrian Empire. Meanwhile, in the central region of Mesopotamia, a new player stepped into the spotlight: Babylon. At first, Babylon was a modest town, dwarfed by the ancient cities of Sumer. But under the rule of the Amorite king Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE, it became a capital of empire. Hammurabi was not just a conqueror. He was a lawgiver and administrator. His most famous achievement was the Code of Hammurabi, a detailed and comprehensive set of laws inscribed on a tall stone stele. To cause justice to prevail in the land, the preamble declared. The code dealt with everything from theft and agriculture to marriage and professional standards. It followed a strict sense of retributive justice, famously summarized by the phrase, an eye for an eye. But the code was also deeply hierarchical. Penalties varied depending on one's class. Nobles, commoners, and slaves were not equal under the law. Still, the existence of a public legal system showed a mature and organized state. Babylon under Hammurabi became a center of administration, religion, and learning. Temples were restored, schools thrived, and scribes copied older Sumerian texts, preserving them for future generations. Though Akkadian was now the dominant language, the cultural heritage of Sumer was not forgotten. It was absorbed and continued. Hammurabi's death around 1750 BCE marked the high point of Babylon's first dynasty. His successors struggled to maintain the empire, and in the following centuries, Babylonian dominance waned. But the city itself remained a cultural beacon, and its name would echo through history. As Mesopotamia entered the Late Bronze Age, the region fractured once more into competing kingdoms. Kassites took control of Babylon. In the north, Assyria gained strength, preparing for a rise that would reshape the Near East. Trade routes shifted, diplomatic correspondence between kingdoms flourished, and warfare continued as ever to define the rhythms of Mesopotamian life. The foundation laid by the Sumerians, the centralization of the Akkadians, the legal innovations of Ur, and the legacy of Hammurabi formed a layered civilization. Each era built upon the last, adding to the depth and richness of Mesopotamian history. And still, the rivers flowed. The Tigris and Euphrates carried the sediment of time along with the dreams, ruins, and ambitions of the world's first cities. The Kassite dynasty, having taken control of Babylon around the mid-16th century BCE, ushered in a period of relative peace and stability that lasted for over 4 centuries. Though the Kassites were foreign to the region, likely hailing from the Zagros Mountains, they did not seek to dismantle Babylonian traditions. Instead, they absorbed them, adopting the Akkadian language and Sumerian customs and positioning themselves as rightful heirs to Babylon's storied legacy. They rebuilt temples, honored ancient deities, and continued the administrative practices established by their predecessors. The famed temple of Marduk, Babylon's chief god, was expanded and became a center of religious life. Marduk, once a relatively minor deity, now stood at the pinnacle of the Mesopotamian pantheon, a god of kingship, creation, and cosmic order. Though the Kassite period lacked the dramatic military exploits of earlier empires, it was an age of diplomacy. Babylon became a respected participant in the club of great powers alongside Egypt, the Hittites, the Mitanni, and later the Assyrians. Kings corresponded across vast distances on clay tablets written in Akkadian, the lingua franca of diplomacy. These letters, dozens of which survive in the Amarna archive in Egypt, reveal the shared etiquette, alliances, and rivalries of a connected ancient world. While Babylon enjoyed its long Kassite twilight, Assyria was stirring to the north. Originally a trading outpost named for its city god Ashur, Assyria had been a modest kingdom for centuries. But during the Middle Assyrian period, beginning around 1400 BCE, it began to transform. Kings like Ashur-uballit I and Adad-nirari I launched ambitious campaigns to expand Assyrian influence. No longer content with being a regional player, Assyria began laying the groundwork for an empire. The Assyrians were fierce, disciplined, and systematic in their approach to conquest. They built roads, fortresses, and administrative centers to maintain control over newly acquired territories. They perfected the art of siege warfare and developed one of the most efficient militaries of the ancient world. Yet their rise was not merely a story of swords and spears. The Assyrians also contributed to Mesopotamian culture. They preserved and copied Sumerian and Babylonian texts, adding their own insights and interpretations. Assyrian art, characterized by powerful relief carvings, depicted mythological scenes, royal hunts, and military triumphs in vivid detail. Palaces became both administrative hubs and showcases of imperial might, adorned with scenes of divine favor and unyielding kingship. While Assyria rose, the broader Near East entered a time of turmoil. By the 13th and 12th centuries BCE, a mysterious and dramatic collapse swept across the region. The Hittite Empire crumbled, Mycenaean palaces in Greece were abandoned, and cities from Anatolia to Canaan were burned or deserted. Scholars still debate the causes: invasions by the so-called Sea Peoples, internal rebellions, droughts, earthquakes, or systemic collapse. Likely it was a combination of these. Babylon, too, suffered. Around 1155 BCE, its Kassite dynasty fell to Elamite invaders, who looted the great city and even carried off the statue of Marduk. This symbolic act, removing a city's patron god, was more than insult. It was believed to sever the divine connection between the king and his people. Babylon descended into a period of fragmentation and obscurity, overshadowed by the rising Assyrians. In the north, the Assyrians continued their ascent. By the 10th century BCE, they had begun their transformation into the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a regime that would become the most powerful the region had ever seen. Under rulers like Ashurnasirpal II and Tiglath-Pileser III, Assyria expanded aggressively, conquering lands from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. The empire's heart was the Upper Tigris, where cities like Nimrud, Nineveh, and Dur-Sharrukin became centers of administration and splendor. These cities boasted sprawling palaces, libraries, and vast military complexes. The kings of Assyria ruled with a mixture of fear, propaganda, and organization. They deported rebellious populations, resettled conquered peoples, and implemented a centralized system of governors and tribute. Their inscriptions boasted of victory after victory, often with brutal detail: enemies flayed alive, cities razed, kings forced into submission. But behind the ruthless image lay an empire obsessed with order and longevity. Assyrian scribes continued to copy ancient Sumerian and Babylonian texts, preserving myths, scientific knowledge, and religious hymns. Assyrian astrologers observed the heavens, linking celestial events to omens and royal decisions. Knowledge flowed from temple libraries to palace archives. Among the most famous of these collections was the Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, an enormous cache of tablets that included the Epic of Gilgamesh, dictionaries, medical texts, and ritual instructions. Yet even Assyria, with all its might, was not invincible. The very mechanisms that ensured control, military dominance, forced resettlement, and strict bureaucracy also bred resentment. Revolts became more frequent. The vastness of the empire strained its resources, and its enemies began to adapt. By the late 7th century BCE, a coalition of Medes, Babylonians, and Scythians formed to challenge Assyrian supremacy. In 612 BCE, they captured and destroyed Nineveh, bringing the Neo-Assyrian Empire to a dramatic and fiery end. The cities that had once projected such terrifying power were reduced to ash. But from the ruins, Babylon would rise once again. Led by Nabopolassar, a Chaldean from southern Mesopotamia, Babylon declared independence and launched a campaign to reclaim its place as the heart of the world. His son, Nebuchadnezzar II, would bring this dream to fruition. Ruling from 605 to 562 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar transformed Babylon into a dazzling imperial capital. He rebuilt the city's walls, expanded the Temple of Marduk, and constructed the Ishtar Gate, a monumental entrance adorned with blue-glazed bricks and reliefs of lions, dragons, and bulls. This era, known as the Neo-Babylonian Empire, saw a cultural renaissance, with renewed interest in ancient traditions and architectural grandeur. It was during this time that Babylon reached the peak of its majesty. A city of towering temples, lush gardens, and wide avenues. Later legends would speak of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, said to have been built by Nebuchadnezzar for his Median wife. While archaeological evidence remains elusive, the legend reflects Babylon's reputation for opulence and innovation. Nebuchadnezzar was also a shrewd military leader. He campaigned in the Levant, defeated Egyptian forces, and captured Jerusalem. Many inhabitants of Judah were exiled to Babylon during this time, an event that would leave a profound mark on biblical history and Jewish identity. As Babylon flourished, its legacy deepened. The ancient city, whose roots reached back to Sumerian foundations, had now become the inheritor of nearly 2 millennia of civilization. From humble settlements along the rivers to the imperial courts of the greatest kings, Mesopotamia's long and layered history was etched into every stone and tablet. But even Babylon, like all that came before, would eventually face decline. Another power, rising further to the east, cast its gaze westward. The world was about to change again, and the story of Mesopotamia would enter its final act. The glory of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II marked the last great flowering of native Mesopotamian civilization. The ziggurats towered, the temples echoed with hymns, and scribes continued to write in cuneiform on clay. But time was catching up with this ancient world, and forces far beyond the Euphrates were stirring. To the east, in the highlands of Persia, a new power had emerged, the Achaemenid Empire. Founded by Cyrus the Great, this vast realm was uniting the Iranian plateau and expanding rapidly toward Mesopotamia. Cyrus was not merely a conqueror, he was a strategist and a diplomat. He offered autonomy to subject peoples, respected local religions, and sought to govern with a blend of tolerance and control. In 539 BCE, Cyrus marched on Babylon. But unlike past conquests, the city was taken without a siege. Babylon's gates were reportedly opened by its own citizens, weary of internal strife and the unpopular rule of Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon. Cyrus entered the city as a liberator, not a destroyer. The great temple of Marduk was spared and religious ceremonies continued uninterrupted. A cuneiform tablet known as the Cyrus Cylinder records the event with pride. It describes Cyrus as chosen by Marduk himself to restore peace and order. Though clearly propaganda, the tone of the inscription is telling Cyrus understood the deep traditions of Mesopotamia and adapted his rule to its ancient customs. Under Persian rule, Mesopotamia became a satrapy or province of a far larger empire. The Persians did not impose their own language or religion, instead they allowed Babylonian culture to continue under imperial oversight. Temples remained active and scribes continued to write in Akkadian and Sumerian. But slowly, changes began to take root. Aramaic, a Semitic language with a simpler script than cuneiform, became the administrative language of the empire. Over time, it began to supplant Akkadian in daily use. Writing on clay tablets gave way to parchment and papyrus. Cuneiform, the hallmark of Mesopotamian identity, began to fade from use. Yet Mesopotamia remained important. Babylon was one of the crown jewels of the Persian Empire. The royal road from Susa to Sardis passed through its territory. Its wealth supported imperial campaigns, and its astronomers continued to observe the skies, recording planetary movements, eclipses, and omens in traditions that dated back over 1,000 years. The priesthood remained active as well. The Temple of Asagila, dedicated to Marduk, continued to function with its rituals and festivals. The Akita festival, celebrating the new year, reaffirmed the cosmic order and the king's divine mandate. Even Persian rulers participated, seeking legitimacy through ancient Mesopotamian rites. But despite this continuity, something fundamental had changed. Mesopotamia was no longer the master of its own fate. The region that had once birthed empires was now one province among many in a vast imperial system. Still, its intellectual and cultural legacy remained profound. Mesopotamian scholars continued their work in mathematics and astronomy. They refined a base, 60-number system that influenced timekeeping and geometry. They recorded celestial events with astonishing precision, laying the foundations for later Hellenistic and Islamic science. Their star charts, lunar cycles, and eclipse predictions were studied for centuries. In the 5th century BCE, under the reign of Darius I, Babylon remained vital though restive. Darius had to suppress revolts in the region, and later kings faced similar challenges. But the city endured, its temples still humming with ritual, its scribes still copying ancient texts. Then, in 331 BCE, the balance of power shifted again. Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king whose campaigns had already shattered the Persian Empire, marched into Mesopotamia. After defeating Darius III at Gaugamela, Alexander entered Babylon to the sound of cheers. The city opened its gates willingly, and Alexander, like Cyrus before him, treated it with reverence. He recognized Babylon's historical and symbolic importance. He ordered repairs to its temples, made sacrifices to Marduk, and even began planning Babylon as a capital for his envisioned world empire. In many ways, Alexander represented both a break from and a continuation of the region's long tradition of kingship. He sought not to erase Mesopotamian culture but to integrate it into a broader Hellenistic world. Yet Alexander's ambitions were cut short. In 323 BCE, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, he fell ill and died. His death at the age of 32 sent shockwaves across his empire. Babylon, which had once again stood at the heart of global power, began its final descent. In the power struggles that followed, the Seleucid dynasty, Greek successors to Alexander, took control of Mesopotamia. They founded new cities, including Seleucia on the Tigris, which gradually replaced Babylon as the region's administrative center. Greek became the language of the elite, and Hellenistic culture mingled with the ancient traditions of the land. But Babylon, the eternal city, slowly emptied. Its temples fell into disrepair. The ziggurat of Edom and Enki, long associated with the biblical Tower of Babel, crumbled. By the 1st century CE, Babylon was all but abandoned. The ancient scripts, too, faded from memory. Cuneiform tablets, once etched daily by skilled scribes, were no longer understood. By the time Roman emperors ruled the region, the language of Sumer had been silent for over a millennium. The temples were dust, the libraries forgotten. The great kings and gods of old remembered only in scattered echoes. And yet Mesopotamia's legacy was far from dead. Its innovations lived on in law, in writing, in mathematics, in astronomy. The concept of the 60-minute hour, the zodiac, and lunar calendars all trace their roots to Mesopotamian thought. Religious ideas developed here, the flood myth, the Garden of Paradise, the cosmic battle between good and evil shaped the theologies of later cultures including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Its stories, buried in clay and forgotten for centuries, began to resurface in the 19th century when European explorers and archaeologists uncovered ruins at Nineveh, Ur, Babylon, and other sites. Thousands of tablets were discovered, still legible, still potent with history. The Epic of Gilgamesh was translated once more. The voices of Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians spoke again. Mesopotamia had not disappeared. It had been sleeping, buried under silt, scattered across empires, whispered in myth. Its rivers still flowed. Its soil still remembered. The cradle of civilization had become the memory of civilization. And even now, as we speak of it in quiet tones, as though not to wake the ancients too abruptly, the echoes remain of temples rising toward the sky, of styluses pressing into clay, of kings proclaiming their glory beneath the eyes of watchful gods. The sun would rise again over the Euphrates. But never again would it rise on a land so ancient, so layered, and so foundational as Mesopotamia. Centuries passed, and the once great cities of Mesopotamia disappeared beneath layers of dust and time. Their bricks were scavenged by villagers. Their names lingered only in myth and scripture. Babylon became a symbol of arrogance and ruin. Nineveh, once the jewel of Assyria, was little more than a whisper in ancient texts. For nearly 2,000 years, the world forgot the people who had invented writing, measured the stars, and ruled with the first kings in recorded history. The floodplains of Iraq, then ruled by successive Islamic caliphates, Ottoman governors, and tribal emirs, held their secrets well. The cuneiform tablets lay buried. The ziggurats stood like worn hills on the horizon, mistaken for natural mounds. But the silence would not last forever. In the early 19th century, Western explorers began venturing into the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates with curiosity and ambition. Inspired by biblical references and ancient Greek texts, they sought the ruins of the cities mentioned in Scripture, Babel, Ur, Nineveh, and others. What they found would change the understanding of human history forever. Among the first to make a serious effort was Claudius James Rich, a British traveler and diplomat who visited the site of Babylon in the early 1800s. Though he found little more than crumbling walls and scattered bricks, he noted the scale of the ruins and began mapping them. He collected artifacts and opened the door to more focused exploration. Soon after, other adventurers followed. At a time when European powers competed fiercely for influence, archaeology became both a scholarly and a political enterprise. Expeditions were funded not just to uncover history but to display national prestige. In the 1840s, Austen Henry Layard, a British diplomat and archaeologist, began excavating at a site near modern-day Mosul. The local people called the Mount Kuyunjik, but Layard believed it might be Nineveh. He was right. What he uncovered stunned the world. Enormous palace walls decorated with stone reliefs, colossal winged bulls with human heads, lamassu, guarding ancient doorways, and most remarkable of all, room after room of clay tablets, stacked and scattered, bearing the strange wedge-shaped marks of a long-dead script. These were the remains of Ashurbanipal's library, a collection of thousands of texts, myths, administrative records, spells, omens, and hymns, preserved by the dry soil and the clay itself. Unlike fragile parchment, clay tablets could survive millennia, and now they spoke again. But first, someone had to learn their language. The script, cuneiform, had been completely forgotten. Though scholars had made progress deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs through the Rosetta Stone, Mesopotamia had no such key. Yet the tablets contained multiple languages, some in Akkadian, some in Sumerian, and a few bilingual examples. A major breakthrough came with the study of Old Persian cuneiform inscriptions at Behistun, a massive rock carving in western Iran created by Darius the Great. Carved high into a cliff, the inscription included the same text in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Scholars like Henry Rawlinson climbed the cliffs, copied the inscriptions, and worked to decode them. By comparing the scripts, Rawlinson and others slowly cracked the system. Like detectives of language, they deciphered one sign at a time. Soon, they could read Akkadian. Then Sumerian followed. The forgotten languages of ancient Mesopotamia were reborn. The discovery of the Epic of Gilgamesh stunned the scholarly world. A flood story bearing striking similarities to the biblical tale of Noah emerged from clay tablets written over 1,000 years earlier. The legend of a semi-divine king who struggled with mortality and sought eternal life suddenly gave voice to a civilization whose literature predated Homer by centuries. As excavations continued into the late 19th and early 20th centuries, more cities were uncovered. Ur, the great Sumerian capital, was excavated by Leonard Woolley, who unearthed royal tombs filled with gold, lapis lazuli, and exquisitely crafted artifacts, proof not only of material wealth but of a sophisticated artistic tradition. Woolley's team also uncovered a structure he identified as the Great Ziggurat of Ur, still rising above the desert like a monument to the heavens. Nearby, they found residential districts, schools for scribes, and tablets containing everything from tax records to lullabies. Life in ancient Mesopotamia came vividly into focus. The story was no longer just about kings and empires. It was about people, farmers, artisans, merchants, priests, and children, living in organized cities, governed by law, worshipping gods whose names had once echoed across the floodplains. Throughout the 20th century, archaeological methods improved. Stratigraphy, carbon dating, and satellite imaging allowed for more precise reconstructions of the past. Entire libraries were cataloged. Sumerian grammar was taught at universities. The study of Mesopotamia Assyriology became a respected academic field. But the discoveries also brought deeper questions. Why did such a vibrant civilization disappear? Why did the knowledge of writing, architecture, and astronomy vanish, only to be reinvented centuries later by other cultures? How could entire languages fall into oblivion? The answers are layered. Mesopotamia, though inventive and resilient, was deeply vulnerable. Its political structure often depended on the strength of individual kings. The cities were magnets for invaders. Its reliance on complex irrigation systems made it sensitive to environmental change. And its writing system, cuneiform, though powerful, was difficult to learn and restricted to a scholarly elite. When the centers of power shifted, and new languages and scripts took hold, much was lost. And yet, much endured. The myths of Mesopotamia found new forms in other traditions. The structure of kingship, divine law, and priestly authority influenced later empires. The idea that knowledge could be preserved in writing, fixed for all time, transformed human civilization forever. Today, as we look back across 5,000 years of history, we see Mesopotamia not as a relic, but as a foundation. The place where cities were first imagined, where writing was born, where human beings first looked at the stars and wondered what they meant, and then wrote down the answers. The clay tablets, fragile and crumbling, hold within them the voice of the first historians, the first mathematicians, the first poets. They remind us that history is not only about battles and rulers, but about the thoughts and dreams of those who lived long before us. And though the cities are now ruins, and the rivers have changed course, the spirit of Mesopotamia remains alive. In our clocks, in our calendars, in our libraries, and in our endless search to understand the world. The land between the rivers may no longer rule the earth, but it gave the world something even greater, the idea of civilization itself. Even in their fall, the civilizations of ancient Mesopotamia did not vanish. Like seeds carried on the wind, their ideas drifted far beyond the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, embedding themselves in cultures that followed. Though the cities crumbled and the languages were forgotten, the foundations they laid would shape the course of human history. Perhaps nowhere is this legacy more visible than in writing. The invention of cuneiform was not just a local innovation, it was a revolution in human cognition. For the first time, thoughts, orders, laws, and dreams could be preserved across time and distance. Kings could issue decrees. Priests could record rituals. Merchants could track inventories. Poets could immortalize epics. This idea that language could be recorded permanently would spread to the Hittites, the Elamites, the Persians, and eventually influence alphabetic scripts like Phoenician, Greek, and Latin. The act of writing, born in Sumerian temples, became the bedrock of education, government, religion, and literature around the world. So too did the Mesopotamian approach to law and justice leave a lasting mark. Hammurabi's code was not merely a set of rules, it was a worldview. It asserted that society could be governed not by whim or violence, but by known and public statutes. It introduced ideas like the presumption of guilt or innocence based on evidence, the role of judges, and class-based legal distinctions. While the specifics of Hammurabi's laws, harsh punishments, and rigid social divisions may not have endured, the underlying principles did. They helped inspire later legal traditions, including the Hebrew Bible's laws, Roman jurisprudence, and even elements of Islamic and Western legal thought. In science, Mesopotamian contributions were just as profound. The priests and scholars who watched the stars from their ziggurats were not merely astrologers. They were among the first astronomers. They recorded lunar and solar eclipses, tracked planetary motion, and developed star catalogs. Their division of the sky into constellations is the ancestor of our modern zodiac. They used a base 60-number system, which seems odd today but was brilliant for calculations. Because 60 is divisible by so many other numbers, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, it allowed for efficient division and fractions. From this system comes the 60-minute hour, the 60-second minute, and the 360-degree circle. We still tell time and measure angles using Mesopotamian math. They understood compound interest, used geometry to measure land, and compiled detailed medical texts that prescribed diagnoses, treatments, and rituals. Some even differentiated between natural and supernatural causes of illness, a subtle but significant conceptual leap towards scientific thinking. Their legacy is also spiritual. The myths of Mesopotamia provided some of the earliest frameworks for understanding the divine, the cosmos, and the human role in creation. Take the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. It begins with primordial chaos, waters mingling in darkness until the gods emerge. Through a divine battle, order is established. The heavens and earth are fashioned, time is measured, and humankind is created from the blood of a defeated god to serve the divine. This story echoes in later traditions. The idea of a primordial chaos, a creator deity, a cosmic battle, and the special role of humans appears in Genesis, in Zoroastrian texts, in Greek myths, and even in modern theological thought. The flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the gods wipe out humanity and one righteous man is warned to build a boat, parallels the biblical story of Noah almost line by line. Mesopotamian religion also gave us the idea of divine justice, the notion that kings ruled not by mere power but by divine favor. Temples were not only places of worship, they were institutions of learning, finance, law, and diplomacy. The gods were everywhere, in the rivers, the stars, the winds, the crops. To understand the divine was to understand the world. And yet, Mesopotamian religion was not static. Over thousands of years, the pantheon shifted. Gods rose and fell in prominence. New myths were created, old ones reinterpreted. This flexibility showed a deep cultural resilience and a capacity for adaptation. Key traits in a land that endured invasions, droughts, and dynastic collapse. Even the city itself, a Mesopotamian invention, shaped the way humanity lived. The concept of organized, centralized settlements with planned streets, public buildings, and infrastructure like canals and granaries began in Sumer. From Uruk and Ur to Babylon and Nineveh, these were not just collections of people but living organisms managed, governed, and built with purpose. The temple complex and the palace were its heart. The walls, its skin. The irrigation systems, its veins. The scribes, its memory. The city was not just a place to live, it was a cosmic center, a reflection of divine order on earth. This concept spread through the ancient world, to Egypt, to the Indus Valley, to Anatolia, to Greece and Rome. The modern metropolis, its zoning, its government, its bureaucracy, traces its roots back to these first cities of clay and reeds. But perhaps most poignantly, Mesopotamia gave us the idea of human striving, the recognition of our mortality, and the longing to leave a mark. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the titular hero, two-thirds divine and yet wholly human, seeks eternal life. He confronts death, grieves his friend, and journeys to the ends of the earth. He meets the survivor of the Great Flood, learns the futility of immortality, and returns home, changed. In the end, he accepts his place in the world and takes comfort in the city he built. It is a deeply human tale about love, loss, ambition, and acceptance. Its power endures because it reflects the truth of civilization itself, that while individual lives end, their echoes can endure in the things we build, the words we write, and the stories we tell. So we remember Mesopotamia not just as an archaeological site or a chapter in a textbook, but as a mirror, one that reflects who we were and who we became. In our laws, our cities, our calendars, our myths, in the very act of writing, we are still, in some way, citizens of that ancient land between the rivers. And as we fall asleep tonight, letting our thoughts drift like boats on the Euphrates, we carry with us a thread that stretches back 5,000 years, woven through the ziggurats of Ur, the libraries of Nineveh, the palaces of Babylon, and the silent clay of forgotten scribes. The thread that binds us to Mesopotamia, the place where history began. Even though the people of ancient Mesopotamia are long gone, their voices still whisper through time. Their clay tablets may be silent, but their ideas are not. They live on in the way we write, the way we count, the way we organize our cities, and even in the stories we tell to explain the world. You may not realize it, but much of what we do each day connects back to them. When you look at a clock and see 60 seconds in a minute or 60 minutes in an hour, that comes from the way Mesopotamians counted. Their base 60 system was smart and flexible. It helped them divide time and space in ways we still use today. When we tell time, when we measure the degrees in a circle, when we look up at the stars and think about the months of the year and the signs of the zodiac, we are continuing what their priests and scholars began long ago on the flat rooftops of Sumerian temples. Their scientists were curious people. They watched the moon rise and fall and they wrote down its cycles. They tracked planets, comets, and eclipses. They believed the heavens were full of messages from the gods, but they were also deeply careful in how they recorded what they saw. They built early forms of calendars and they made predictions about seasons and weather, important knowledge for farming and festivals. And speaking of farming, that too was something they improved. Living in a land between two great rivers, they had to learn how to use water wisely. They dug canals and built dikes. They created systems to water their fields during dry seasons. The first real irrigation systems in history came from them. This allowed them to grow enough food for large cities. They didn't just grow wheat and barley. They raised sheep and goats. They pressed dates into sweet cakes. They brewed beer, yes, even that is part of their legacy. In fact, the oldest recipes for food and drink come from clay tablets in Mesopotamia. They ate together, they told stories, and they celebrated life, just like we do. Their cities, too, were well-planned and full of energy. They had workshops for craftsmen, homes for families, schools for children learning to write, and temples for worship. Their homes were often made of sun-dried brick, built close together, with flat roofs where people could sit at night and feel the breeze. In the city of Ur, archaeologists found evidence of board games, early versions of entertainment. They even found musical instruments, harps, flutes, and drums. Music, art, and play were all part of Mesopotamian life. But they also knew sorrow. Life in Mesopotamia was not always easy. Floods could destroy crops. Droughts could cause famine. Wars between city-states were common. And always, there was the feeling that human life was short and the gods were powerful and sometimes hard to understand. That's why they told stories, not just for fun, but to explain these feelings. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories ever written, shows this clearly. It tells us that even the greatest kings must face death, that even the strongest men feel sadness and fear. But it also tells us that beauty and meaning can still be found in friendship, in memory, and in the things we build for the future. In a way, Mesopotamians knew that what we leave behind, our words, our creations, our kindness, matters more than how long we live. Their wisdom was passed on in quiet ways. When the Hebrews were exiled to Babylon, they came into contact with Mesopotamian ideas. Some of these stories and beliefs were woven into the Old Testament: the flood, the tower, the garden, the struggle between man and the divine. These tales weren't copied exactly, but they were shaped by the same world, the same questions about life and purpose. Later, as the Greeks and Romans expanded their empires, they too encountered the remnants of Mesopotamian knowledge. And after that, during the Islamic Golden Age, scholars in Baghdad, once part of ancient Babylon, preserved and built upon this ancient wisdom. They studied astronomy, medicine, and math, keeping the torch of knowledge alive. Even in modern times, when archaeologists first read cuneiform and began piecing together this lost history, they were amazed. It was as if a forgotten part of humanity had suddenly come back to life. And now we remember. We remember the great ziggurats, man-made mountains built to reach the sky. We remember the libraries filled with clay tablets, carefully written by hand, pressed with tiny wedges. We remember the kings who ruled, the priests who prayed, the builders who raised walls and temples, the farmers who tilled the soil. We remember the mothers, the children, the musicians, the bakers, the soldiers. The people whose names we may never know, but whose lives helped build the world. Today, the ruins of Mesopotamia sit quiet under the desert sun. The rivers still flow, though not always in the same paths. The cities are dust, but their stories are alive. We speak of Babylon in books, sing of it in songs, and study it in schools. We still read Gilgamesh. We still learn from Hammurabi. We still wonder at the sky, just like they did. We are not so different from them. We laugh, we work, we love, we search for meaning. We want to be remembered. And maybe like the Mesopotamians, we hope that something we leave behind, an idea, a song, a story, will outlast us. So as you drift off to sleep, think of those ancient people. Thousands of years ago, under the same stars, they too looked up and wondered. They too dreamed of tomorrow. And in doing so, they helped create the world we know today. As the night deepens and your thoughts grow still, we reach the final part of our journey through ancient Mesopotamia, a land of rivers, of kings, of temples and tablets, of stories older than time. We began with mud brick villages near the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates. There, the first farmers learned to work the land, raise animals, and settle into communities. Those small villages grew into cities. And those cities became kingdoms, then empires. It was here that humans took the first steps into organized life. They shaped the world with their hands, built walls to protect their people, carved canals to guide the water, and raised towers toward the heavens. They built not only with brick, but with imagination, with systems, beliefs, and dreams. In Mesopotamia, we first see writing, symbols pressed into clay that carried meaning across time. Through these marks, the voices of the past still speak to us. They left records of trade, laws, prayers, and poems. From these early records came history itself. We watched as powerful cities rose: Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Akkad, Babylon, Nineveh. And with them came powerful names: Gilgamesh, the hero king; Sargon, the first empire builder; Hammurabi, the lawgiver; Ashurbanipal, the scholar king; Nebuchadnezzar, the builder of Babylon's beauty. We remembered their temples where gods were worshipped and the stars observed. Their rituals and festivals brought life and rhythm to the year. Their beliefs, though shaped by fear and wonder, offered comfort and understanding in a hard world. They believed the gods watched over them, that the stars were full of meaning, that death was not the end but a journey, that to live well was to serve, to build, to remember. And now we remember them. We saw how their knowledge spread across the world, how their stories mixed with others, how the flood tale found its way into the Bible, how their numbers still live in our clocks, how their questions about life, fate, and love still feel familiar today. We saw their fall too, how war, time, and change broke down their cities, how their languages were forgotten, how the great ziggurats turned to ruins, and yet even in silence their legacy waited to be found again. And it was. In the 1800s, buried cities were uncovered. Ancient libraries were read again. Gilgamesh returned from the dust. Babylon's gates stood tall once more in museums far from home. The Lamassu, those great winged guardians, rose again, their faces calm, their wings wide. Scholars learned to read cuneiform. They pieced together the stories. They mapped the cities, traced the rivers, and gave names to the forgotten. And in doing so, they restored a part of human memory that had been missing for thousands of years. Mesopotamia had not vanished, it had been sleeping. Now, as we finish this long and gentle journey, we see what Mesopotamia truly was, not just the cradle of civilization, but the beginning of us. The beginning of writing, of counting, of building, of believing, of wondering. We carry it with us even now. In the libraries we build, filled with books instead of clay tablets. In the schools where we teach children to read and write. In the laws we pass, the cities we plan, the clocks we check, the skies we still look up at. In every document we write, in every story we tell, in every moment we try to understand the world, we are walking in footsteps first made in the land between two rivers. And what of the people themselves? They were not so different from us. They lived in families. They worked in markets. They grew food, built homes, raised children, and sought peace. They feared the unknown. They hoped for good fortune. They tried to make sense of the stars above and the earth below. They laughed, they sang, they loved. And in the end, they tried to leave something behind. They did. They left us the first map of the stars, the first city plan, the first school lesson, the first story. We are the continuation of that story. As you rest now, let your mind drift over that ancient landscape one more time. Picture the wide, slow rivers winding through fields of grain. See the tall ziggurats rising above the city walls, touched by golden light. Hear the soft chant of temple priests, the scratch of styluses on wet clay, the market noise of sellers and buyers, the laughter of children at play. It is all still there, in memory, in history, in the soul of what it means to be human. So tonight, as the world grows quiet, you are not alone. You are surrounded by thousands of years of voices from the first people who wrote, who wondered, who dreamed. You are resting in the same story they began. Sleep now gently with the rivers of Mesopotamia flowing softly in your thoughts. Let the past hold you like a lullaby. Let the stars above shine with ancient meaning. Let the memory of the first cities settle around you like warm clay shaped by hands long gone yet never truly forgotten. For the land between the rivers still speaks. And tonight, you listened. Thank you for joining this journey through time. Through the rivers and cities of a world long past yet never forgotten. May the stories of Mesopotamia stay with you like a gentle lullaby.